All right, I'm going to do things a little differently for this chapter. Rather than going through all of the slides and making sure that we're hitting every single thing, I'm going to mostly focus on the symptoms of the disorders that we're talking about, and leave it to you to look at the causes of that symptom from different perspectives, whether that's the biological or the sociocultural, or there's quite a bit to cover there. But I want to save a little time to talk about more pressing concerns. So I'm going to talk mostly just about the symptoms. What we're talking about, as you can see, are depressive and bipolar disorders. Those are two different sort of subgroups of disorders, all of which have at least some of these characteristics, right? So just so that we're all on the same page, definitionally, depression, while that's something that we talk about all of the time in everyday life, this is feelings of sadness and lack of self-worth, low levels of energy, and feelings of despair that are pretty commonly known to everybody in our society, at least, and in most societies. Everybody feels this way a little bit sometimes. And so that's a symptom, not necessarily the disorder itself. It's a question of how severe those symptoms are, whether or not you have a diagnosable disorder. The flip side of this is mania, a little, well, much less common state, but that you may have experienced some of these symptoms in mild ways before, where you're just on top of the world. You feel great. You feel way more energetic than usual. You're zipping from one thing to the next and feel like you can conquer anything. No task is too large, and you can get it all done. Although you get to the end of the day in a manic state and you find, oh wait, I didn't actually get any of those things done. I started a whole lot of projects and didn't finish any of them. But generally speaking, there's an inflated sense of self-worth and capacity and self-aggrandizement that goes with that. Your depressive disorders will only exhibit symptoms of depression symptoms, generally speaking, whereas your bipolar disorder includes symptoms of both depression and mania. So unipolar depression is a term that includes our depressive disorders and is used to distinguish between simply depressive disorders and then bipolar disorders that do also have elements of depression in them but have something else going on too. And so when you're talking about sort of just the depressive disorders, a common umbrella term is just unipolar depression, right? You do have different disorders within unipolar depression. You've got major depressive disorder and persistent depressive disorder, and a couple others we'll talk about here in just a minute. If we're just talking about depressive disorders, the rates here, you've got 8% of U.S. adults in any given year experiencing the symptoms of some depressive disorder, 5% on top of that suffering from more mild forms. So that's, a significant chunk of folks, and there are cultural differences, as you can see there, in terms of the rates of both diagnosis and symptoms. But generally speaking, our depressive disorders are recognized as the most costly disorders in terms of time lost from work, disability claims, and other costs to the society. Those numbers rack up real quick. When you can't get stuff done when you're otherwise healthy, that's a real problem. Up to 20% of all adults will experience these symptoms at some point during their life, and it's these disorders are most likely to come on to show themselves and develop during late adolescence, early adulthood. And then there are some groups for whom it becomes more likely that you'll experience depression. Most specifically, those who are the most elderly tend to have higher levels of depression because it's actually really hard to get quite old and have your body breaking down and your society not respect you. as it turns out. So you do see those differences. Now, we've got a bunch of different symptoms that cover a broad range of wow, I'm really struggling with my words today, aren't I? You've got a variety of different types of symptoms. And so let's sort of take these one by one. Emotional symptoms, as I was saying, this is feeling sad, feeling bad about yourself, right? I feel unhappy, I feel worthless, I feel incapable. Um, that's the emotion aspect of it, right? And it just pretty much has to do with low affect, feeling bad about yourself. Now that ties in really closely to motivational symptoms. One very common um, symptom of depressive disorders is a loss of interest in one's usual activities, the things that you actually do care about. When you stop caring about them, that is a warning sign in terms of depression. I really love whatever it is that you love, movies or basketball or whatever it is. When you find yourself thinking, yeah, I just don't care. Now, I mean, that can't happen. Just because you stop liking something you used to like doesn't automatically mean you're depressed, right? It has to be together with all of this other stuff. If you're feeling fine about yourself and you're suddenly like, basketball, don't care anymore, that's okay. Your interests are allowed to change, but you put that together with feeling really bad about yourself and having some of these other difficulties that we'll talk about here in just a minute, and that definitely falls within the realm of depressive disorders. Okay, behavioral symptoms: changes in the way that you behave. Um, this is an interesting one. That has, once again, ties closely into your motivational symptoms, right? If you not only lose interest in your usual activities, but then actually stop doing your usual activities, you withdraw from individuals and spend less time with friends, um, and are crying more than usual. Um, these are behavioral symptoms, right? So you're having a hard time getting out of bed, um, where you can't feel the motivation to even bother, getting up, getting showered, getting dressed. Those are, once again, warning signs, things to look at and worry about when it comes to depression. Cognitive symptoms: you will frequently find changes in the way that people think, not only in terms of increased worrying and excessive focus on your own problems, right? So someone who is experiencing depression will do that, absolutely, right? Um, they'll spend more time thinking, why do I suck so bad? And why am I so bad at everything? And why does nobody love me? Um, so that's one aspect of it. Increased thoughts of suicide are another cognitive symptom that is not to be dismissed. If suddenly it's like, it'd really be nice to not be alive. That's absolutely something that goes along with depressive disorders. And last but not least is physical symptoms. Sometimes you'll see changes in severe cases in terms of people's physical functioning, where they will actually literally move at a different speed, either become more sluggish or more agitated in their movement. Changes in sleeping patterns are another one, where either you're experiencing very high levels of insomnia suddenly, or you're sleeping way more than you used to. It can be in either direction. Changes in appetite also. Those last couple perhaps belong more in the behavioral symptoms, not the physical symptoms, but those sort of do trend together. Okay. So, if we're talking about the DSM-5, you've got your different depressive disorders that we're going to talk about: major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And that last one, you may be like, wait, that's not a thing. It is. And we'll get to that here in just a minute. Okay, so a major depressive episode is when a person is experiencing decreased enjoyment in their usual activities and depressed mood for most of their waking hours over the course of 2 weeks or more, right? So it doesn't, I mean, you can have moments where you're like, yeah, things are okay. But if you're spending most of the time saying, wow, life sucks and I really hate this and I don't want to do my stuff and bed, see you folks, Netflix and bed, and that's all I'm doing. Um, that if you were experiencing that as well as 3 or 4 of these other symptoms down below, where you have change in appetite or weight, changes in sleeping activity, change in your motor activity, right? Like I was saying, either you become more physically agitated or more lethargic, high levels of fatigue, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, and an inability to focus. That's another cognitive symptom that I forgot to mention. Fuzzy thinking, having a hard time focusing on things and paying attention, is another symptom of depression. One of your cognitive symptoms, right? So if you've got at least a couple of those things, along with depressed mood and lack of interest in your own activities for at least 2 weeks, then that qualifies as a major depressive episode, right? And a single episode is diagnosable. You go into your therapist or doctor and tell them that that's what's been happening, and that is diagnosable and treatable. Now, even within a single episode, or if you have multiples of these episodes, which moves into more persistent depressive disorder, which we'll talk about next, you do have variability in how severe these symptoms can get, right? Some folks will just sort of feel this stuff at a fairly low level and may have a hard time getting their stuff done and may be struggling, but are struggling on a level where it's like, you can still recover from that, right? I spend a lot of my time that way, honestly, is sort of at this sort of low level depression where I'm like, well, this sucks, but okay, let's keep going, right? No, I should probably get in and get that looked at, honestly. However, there is that level, which would be a mild or moderate level of depressive disorder that is still diagnosable. And then you have more severe symptoms where a person is crying constantly, can't get out of bed at all, is letting everything go. The house is starting to stink because nothing's been cleaned and the dishes are piling up and whatever else. And they're thinking about committing suicide and maybe even making a plan to commit suicide. That's the more severe end, and those are the folks who need to get help, sort of post haste, immediately. And no matter whether it's more moderate or more severe, there needs to be some level of distress and dysfunction in order for this to be diagnosable. Okay, so with persistent depressive disorder, you get repeated episodes of major or moderate depressive disorders. And this needs to go on for 2 years or more. And during that 2-year period, it needs to be persistent enough that you're not going more than 2 months at a time without experiencing these symptoms. So you're feeling this most of the time over a long period of time. That is what we call persistent depressive disorder. And it is only persistent depressive disorder if you're not having episodes of mania or hypomania, which I'll describe in more detail when we get to bipolar disorder in the other video. But essentially, when you're experiencing very high levels of mood, that can't be happening. If you've got that going on, then that's a different disorder that needs a different set of treatments, not persistent depressive disorder. Okay. And then the other ones we mentioned, I'm going to skip around here in the slides. Oh, let's go ahead and talk about this. Postpartum depression is a subset of one of our depressive disorders that is specifically related to birthing a child, right? So and this is quite common in both mild and more severe forms, after a woman has a baby, she will frequently feel depressive symptoms, right? Low levels of mood and loss of interest in her usual activities, have a hard time taking care of the baby, hard time taking care of herself. And that can last anywhere from a few weeks up to a year or even more. Um, it is perhaps unsurprising given the trauma of childbirth and the massive changes that occur, right? Your hormonal profile has to shift in order to support another person that is growing inside your body, right? And then suddenly all of that other person not there anymore, and not there anymore after a very long, very difficult, pretty traumatic day, right? And then your body has to move back to baseline in terms of its functioning and its hormonal status. And so those shifts can be really severe, and you can get some real deviations in terms of what your body is doing and trying to regulate itself as suddenly the baseline changes, right? You've got baseline with baby in your belly, and then you've got baseline without baby in the belly, and those are two very different things. And so the body sometimes freaks out a little bit as it tries to modulate back down to the old normal instead of the new normal that you were existing at in as a pregnant woman. So a lot of it is hormonal in nature, but there are some genetic markers that make it more likely for a woman to develop postpartum depression. I know my own wife dealt with this. After every single one of our children were born, she would spend, 2 months maybe, anywhere between a month and 2 months, really just sort of struggling to care about things and get out of bed and take care of nonsense and take care of me. I can appreciate that difficulty. I don't even want to take care of myself. And as a result, experienced some fairly mild levels of postpartum depression, and then sort of bounce back without treatment. And that's the most common scenario is, hey, I don't feel good and I'm crying more than usual and this really sucks. And then, it just sort of gets better over the course of a couple of months. But then in more severe cases, it needs some treatment. Not only to help mom feel okay about herself, but to prevent harm to both mom and baby. And so sometimes mom needs to get on antidepressants or go to a therapy group or both. Yeah, that tends to help out. Okay, the last one that I wanted to talk about, no, I'm skipping over some of this stuff. Where is it? Crap. I'm trying to find the post-menstrual, where is it? There it is. Okay, sorry to keep you waiting on that. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff under causes that I want you to take a look at in your books that I'm not going to spend the time on. So premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Okay, so this was a thing in the DSM-4 that got a lot of discussion, a bit of a controversy, where people said, this is not a disorder. This is just, you can't tell me that PMS is a psychological disorder. You're, you're talking about something that all women experience and calling it a psychological disorder. That's crazy. This is not PMS. Okay, this is many of the same symptoms that are associated with PMS, higher levels of stress and irritability and anxiety, negative physical symptoms, feeling poorly physically, and a lack of energy. But it is to the next level, right? So this is not just, feeling cranky for a few days and maybe taking it easy. This is, I can't function and I'm really struggling to manage my life during this time period. That is another level, and that's something that in the DSM-5 they tried to change the language on it to make it make a little bit more sense and put it along with the depressive disorders because it shares a lot of commonalities in terms of the symptoms. But I do want to point out that this is not just PMS, right? You do not have a psychological disorder if you have PMS. Happens very commonly to pretty much everybody who is female. So this is those symptoms taken to a level where it is causing distress and dysfunction, right? And there are biological reasons why any particular woman might experience very, very severe symptoms that then are PDD instead of PMS. Generally speaking, it's genetic sensitivities, genetic markers that make somebody more likely to experience very, very high levels of those negative symptoms. Okay, those are our depressive disorders. Before I wrap this one up, I do just want to say, I always want to make sure to take the time when we're talking about these things. If you recognize yourself in any of these symptoms, and not just like, hey, I feel that way occasionally. Yes, we all feel that way occasionally. If I'm talking about a major depressive episode or persistent depressive episode or any one of these, and you're like, holy crap, that's me. I am not doing well. I'm not getting by. I'm losing friends. I'm having a hard time keeping a job. I am failing my classes. I feel terrible about myself. I'm not sure I want to be alive. Don't put up with it. Okay? Don't just say, "Oh well, that's just me. I am just that way." You don't have to live feeling bad about yourself all of the time. Most folks don't. And if you are feeling that way, it's not just because you're a bad person or because something's wrong with you or you've done something wrong. It's because there is an issue in your body and in your brain, but it is treatable. It is fixable. And there are a variety of ways, whether it's talking about medication with antidepressants. I know a lot of folks, especially in our society, in our sort of Utah bubble, are really, really strongly against antidepressants. It's fine if you feel that way, but there are some folks who genuinely do better, feel better, and are able to function far more normally on these medications than they are without them. Why take that away, right? Why deny yourself that if it is something that could possibly be at least part of the solution? There are talk therapies also that are really effective in reducing a lot of these symptoms of depression. All I want to say here is, if this is you, if you see yourself in these descriptions, do something about it. Talk to somebody about it, especially if you're on the more severe end where it's like, I'm not sure I want to be doing this life and it would be really nice to not. Don't make those plans. Don't do that to yourself. Talk to somebody. Talk to the people who love you, whether that's mom, or if you can't have the conversation with mom, have it with dad, or with big sister, big brother, or heck, I mean, I'm no therapist. I am not that kind of psychologist, but talk to me. Come to my office hours. Shoot me an email. Say, hey, I'm struggling, and I will try to help you find the resources that are available to you as students to help you feel better, help you feel okay, because you're not. It is not normal, and it is not necessary as a human to feel bad all of the time. And you listening to this right now, I'm looking right at you. You are worth more than feeling terrible all of the time. You have something to give that other people need, and you can't give it if you're wrapped up in your own sadness all of the time. So I would encourage you to not just let that be, oh, it just is who I am and I guess I just suck. No, you don't. You are awesome and you've got lots to give. So please, don't just let that go. I'm sorry, that's me getting on my soapbox a little bit, but whenever we talk about these depressive disorders, I feel like I need to spend at least a couple of minutes and talk about that. So yeah, if you need somebody to talk to, shoot me an email. Please do.